6:47 a.m. Strait of Hormuz. Dawn over the strait does not bring a sense of peace. For the watchstanders aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln CVN-72, the dim sunlight is merely a noise variable for optical sensors. Inside the CIC, Combat Information Center, the space is bathed in disciplined, dim blue light. There are no shouts, only the steady hum of computer cooling systems and brief, low-toned reports. Everything appears silent, but beneath the surface of the sea, a deadly game of chess has begun. 120 nautical miles north of the carrier strike group, 3 Iranian Air Force F-14AM Tomcat fighters are executing a script practiced for thousands of hours. These are not obsolete 1970s hardware. They have been overhauled with indigenous radar systems and new microprocessors. However, their most powerful weapon right now is not a missile, but concealment. The 3 Tomcats maintain an extremely low altitude, just 25 meters above the waves. At this height, their massive airframes blend into sea clutter, making it exceptionally difficult for the Aegis cruiser's AN/SPY-1D long-range radar to distinguish between a rogue wave and a 30-ton war machine. This is the art of asymmetry. The Iranian pilots deeply understand American doctrine. They know that if they fly high, they will be neutralized before they even see the enemy. But by crawling just above the water, they force the U.S. fleet to narrow its observational gap. Inside the cockpit of the lead F-14, the commander does not look at the radar screen. He maintains absolute radio silence. All active emitting systems are powered down. They are flying by instinct and preloaded data from passive observation stations along the coast. Meanwhile, in the stratosphere at 35 feet, 2 A-18E Super Hornets from Squadron VFA-14 are on a routine combat air patrol. For the American pilots, this morning seems far too ordinary. But that is exactly when the trap begins to close. The enemy does not want to shoot them down immediately. The objective of the 3 F-14s is to create an information gap. They are luring the U.S. fighters into a zone where Iranian ground-based air defense systems can provide support, while simultaneously forcing the Americans to activate their fire control radars, thereby revealing their positions. The silence in the USS Abraham Lincoln CIC is broken by a low-intensity alarm. A young radar technician observes a minute change in the clutter filtering algorithm. Something is wrong at coordinate 26 degrees north. A mechanical ghost just appeared and then vanished within the reflected wave bands. In modern warfare, uncertainty is the greatest enemy. Within the next 120 seconds, this silence will be shattered. The Iranian tactic relies on a lethal assumption that the Americans will react instinctively and dive low to identify the target. That is when the A-18 altitude and airspeed advantage would be neutralized, turning the engagement into a close-quarters dogfight where the variable sweep wing F-14s remain formidable monsters. However, they have overlooked one thing. The Americans do not play the opponent's game. They are observing this trap from an entirely different angle, one where mathematics and physics hold absolute dominance. 6:58 a.m. As the second hand strikes the 12 mark, reality over the Strait of Hormuz is completely fractured. 3 Iranian F-14AMs simultaneously execute a high-G pop-up maneuver. From an altitude of 25 meters above the sea, they surge upward at Mach 0.9, piercing through the early morning mist to reach 15 feet. This is a calculation of pure geometry. By abruptly changing their altitude, they escape the sea surface diffraction zone, and immediately, the upgraded AWG-9 radar systems are activated in pulse Doppler mode. Powerful bursts of radio waves sweep directly toward the U.S. carrier strike group. Inside the cockpits of the two A-18E Super Hornets, the silence is shredded by the persistent shriek of the radar warning receiver, RWR. On the pilot's head-up display, HUD, a diamond symbol with the number 14 flashes continuously, accompanied by the definitive tone of a hard lock. This is the first shock. The enemy is no longer hiding. They are openly declaring an engagement by exposing their positions. But that is only the tip of the iceberg. Simultaneously, electronic warfare stations along the Iranian coast activate digital radio frequency memory, DRFM, jamming systems. The electromagnetic spectrum around the USS Abraham Lincoln explodes into a storm of white noise. On the radar screens of the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, thousands of ghost targets appear, dancing in chaos. This is a state of information overload. The Aegis system's filtering algorithms must process millions of data packets per second to distinguish between the actual F-14s and the simulated signals generated by the adversary. 7:01 a.m. The lead F-14 launches two Fokker 90 missiles. The 500-kilogram steel masses separate from the airframe, their rocket motors igniting to create massive white plumes against the deep blue sky. The Fokker 90 is a modernized variant of the Phoenix lineage, designed to eliminate high-value targets from extreme distances. They do not fly directly at the target, but instead loft into the stratosphere to utilize the thin atmosphere, maintaining a velocity of Mach 5 before diving like spears from the heavens. The pressure inside the CIC reaches its zenith. Weapon control officers face a horrific probabilistic equation. Reaction time is compressed into mere seconds. While active radar systems are heavily jammed, the Americans fall into a tactical blind spot. They see the incoming missiles. They see the enemy aircraft, but the information turbulence makes establishing a precise fire control solution incredibly difficult. The enemy has successfully created a blinding shock. By combining long-range weaponry with high-intensity electronic warfare, Iran has forced the U.S. fleet into a passive defensive posture. The Super Hornet pilots are now in a dire situation. If they activate their radars to hunt the enemy, they become bright torches guiding the adversary's anti-radiation missiles. If they remain silent, they are blind. Suffocation envelops the entire battle space, where the boundary between a trillion-dollar war machine and a pile of scrap metal is separated only by the human capacity to master chaos. Inside the A-18 cockpit, the American pilot can hear his own heartbeat through the intercom. The Link 16 system begins to display warnings regarding data integrity. Military satellites in low Earth orbit are also being targeted by Iranian laser dazzling systems. This is not merely an aerial engagement. It is an all-out assault on the nervous system of the American military. The information gap currently favors the Iranians, and they are utilizing every millisecond to tighten the noose around the carrier strike group. 7:04 a.m. above the Strait of Hormuz, inside the cockpit of the lead A-18E Super Hornet, call sign Viking 01. The pilot remains unshaken by the frantic alarms. The U.S. Navy's rule of engagement in this scenario is not panic, but cold analysis. Over the intercom, a brief command is issued. Viking 01, cold nose. Instantly, both Super Hornets completely deactivate their APG-79 active radars. On the Iranian screens, the two American targets that were just present suddenly vanish like ghosts. This is a mathematical decision. By deactivating the radar, the Americans have eliminated the signal source that the Iranian anti-radiation missiles were homing in on. However, they are far from blind. Instead, they pivot to the silent eye, the IRS-2-1 infrared search and track system. This is a next-generation passive infrared sensor mounted beneath the centerline fuel tank. It emits no radio waves. It simply listens and observes thermal signatures. At Mach 0.9, the steel skin of the Iranian F-14s, creating friction with the air, generates a massive amount of thermal energy, standing out like flares against the cold backdrop of the stratosphere. The IOST-21 begins decoding these heat plumes, converting them into precise geometric coordinates on a digital map. At this moment, the information gap begins to flip. The Iranians are still pouring all their jamming power into a void, while the Americans are silently observing their every move from high above. 7:06 a.m. Another critical factor emerges. An E-2D Advanced Hawkeye, call sign Big Eye, orbiting at 25 feet, 80 nautical miles away. With its APY-9 active, electronically scanned array radar, the E-2D acts as the brain of the integrated combat network. Via the link, 16 data link, the E-2D streams a panoramic picture of the incoming Fakor-90 missiles directly into the Super Hornet pilot's JHMCS, Joint Helmet-Mounted Cueing System. The American pilots execute a gentle but geometrically calculated turn. They maintain an altitude of 40 feet, utilizing their potential energy advantage to convert into kinetic energy when needed. They refuse to descend for a close-quarters engagement as the opponent intends. In American tactical doctrine, engaging in a close-range dogfight is a systemic failure. Their goal is to maintain separation and neutralize the adversary from beyond visual range. Down in the USS Abraham Lincoln CIC, coordination officers have identified a fire control solution through TDOA, time difference of arrival techniques. By measuring the time difference of the Iranian jamming signals reaching various ships within the strike group, they have pinpointed the exact locations of the shore-based jamming stations. The Americans are no longer trying to look through the fog of interference. They have begun using the fog itself to find the one holding the lantern. The engagement is no longer a shootout. It has become a high-intensity mathematical decryption. 7:11 a.m. The engagement enters a phase of brutal time compression. On the tactical displays of the E-2D Hawkeye, every piece on the board has moved into the precise alignment of a mechanical dissection. Inside the USS Abraham Lincoln CIC, fire control officers no longer stare at disconnected, flickering blips. They are observing a unified reality fused from thousands of disparate data sources. The CEC, Cooperative Engagement Capability, has generated a single truth map. On this map, the positions of the 3 Iranian F-14s are fixed with centimeter-level precision, despite their most aggressive jamming efforts. The fire command is transmitted via a single encrypted string over the link 16 system. The 2 A-18E Super Hornets maintain their cold nose status. Pilot 1 depresses the launch button on the right-hand control stick. 2 AIM 120D AMRAAM missiles separate from the LAU 127 rails. For the first 2 seconds, they fall in free flight before their 2-stage solid rocket motors ignite, generating thrust that surges them to Mach 4 inches an instant. This is where the system of systems philosophy demonstrates absolute dominance. These AIM 120D missiles do not require the A-18s radar for guidance. They receive continuous target updates from the E-2D Hawkeye via a 2-way data link. This means the Iranian pilots receive 0 RWR alerts regarding radar locks from the American fighters. To them, the sky remains artificially silent, while the messengers of death close in at thousands of meters per second. 7:13 a.m. The Iranian F-14 sense an anomaly as their optical sensors detect white plumes from the high horizon. The Iranian-led pilot orders a break-right defensive maneuver and deploys volleys of flares and chaff. They attempt a hard turn. pulling 7.5 Gs to break the missile's tracking solution. Geometrically, this is an attempt to create a radical change in line-of-sight rate, hoping the missile's seeker cannot compensate in time. However, the AIM-120D is not a mere mechanical arrow. It is a flying computer equipped with an integrated GPS inertial navigation system and a miniaturized AESA active radar seeker in its nose. Only when 15 kilometers from the target do the missiles officially activate their internal radars. At this moment, the frantic alarms finally scream inside the Iranian cockpits, but it is far too late. Time has been compressed to the point where human biological limits can no longer respond. Over the next 45 seconds, the devastating precision of American technology is laid bare. The first missile slices through the F-14's jamming screen, executes a trajectory correction using hypersensitive control fins, and detonates its laser proximity fuse. A massive fireball erupts at 20 feet. Only 12 seconds later, the second F-14 is neutralized while attempting an unsuccessful barrel roll. The airframes of the legacy fighters simply cannot withstand the pressure from 21st century proportional navigation algorithms. The third F-14, witnessing two wingmen vanish from the radar screen in a heartbeat, makes a survival decision. The pilot slams the throttles into full afterburner, drops the nose, and dives toward the sea surface to flee back to Iranian airspace. The Americans do not pursue. Their objective was not total annihilation, but the re-establishment of deterrence through absolute mastery of the information gap. The engagement begins and ends in less than 14 minutes. The entire counteroffensive process, from the moment the missiles left the rails to the elimination of the targets, occupied only a fraction of that time. Silence returns to the radio frequencies. Inside the carrier's CIC, the status icons of the targets shift from red to a pale gray, marking mission completion. There is no cheering or applause, only the steady, rhythmic clicking of keyboards as intelligence officers begin harvesting data on missile performance and the jamming frequencies utilized by the adversary. The Americans have just performed a military surgery with the precision and coldness of a machine. 7:25 a.m. The Strait of Hormuz returns to its deceptive tranquility. On the surface of the sea, the deep blue ripples continue their steady rhythm, leaving no trace of the kinetic engagement that transpired just minutes ago. There are no dramatic burning wrecks as depicted in cinema. At 20 feet, what remains of the two F-14s are merely clouds of ultra-fine metallic dust, swiftly dispersed into the void by the sea breeze. Their disappearance from the radar screens was as clean and definitive as the manner in which they were neutralized. To the Aegis system, those fighters are now merely data files stored on hard drives for post-engagement analysis. The third F-14 has now crossed the airspace boundary and is descending to approach its base at Bandar Abbas. Inside the cockpit, the Iranian pilot is likely experiencing a psychological state military analysts describe as the collapse of technical confidence. He executed every doctrine correctly. He flew extremely low to remain concealed. He performed evasive maneuvers at the structural limits of the airframe. Yet, the result was total impotence. The adversary did not need visual acquisition, nor did they require traditional radar locks, but they still shattered every survival effort in less than 14 minutes. Meanwhile, the two A-18E Super Hornets are conducting landing procedures aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln. There is no exuberant welcome or cheering on the flight deck. U.S. Navy professionalism is defined by repeatability and discipline. As the landing gear strikes, the steel deck and the arresting hook secures the aircraft. The pilots exit their cockpits with expressionless faces. To them, this was not a heroic feat, but the execution of a pre-programmed algorithm. The devastating precision of machines has altered the nature of courage. In this era, courage is the steadfastness to maintain absolute radio silence while death closes in. The greatest lesson from this event does not lie in the technical specifications of the AIM-120D missile or the AESA radar. It lies in the concept of the information gap. The Iranian side prepared a trap based on technological understandings from the previous century. They believed that blinding the opponent's radar with electromagnetic interference would create an advantage. However, they engaged a system of systems. Within that system, the blinding of one link does not paralyze the entire network. When a fighter's radar is deactivated, passive infrared sensors and early warning aircraft take over. When information is shared in real time between ships, aircraft, and missiles, battlefield reality becomes transparent to one side and pitch black to the other. This engagement serves as evidence that true stealth is not found in radar-absorbent coatings, but in radio silence. He who controls electromagnetic emissions controls the battle space. The Americans won not because they had faster planes, but because they converted the opponent's chaos into structured data. The information gap is a black hole, and any asset that falls into it without network link support will be crushed by mathematics and logic. We have just witnessed a simulation of how technology and discipline crush isolated asymmetric efforts. In future videos, we will continue to deep dive into more complex engagement scenarios where artificial intelligence and autonomous systems begin to dominate the skies. Thank you for following this in-depth analysis. Do not forget to hit subscribe and the bell icon to stay updated on the next tactical reports on this channel. What are your thoughts on whether legacy assets still stand a chance in the future? Leave a comment below. See you at the next Tactical Coordinates. End of report.